Hello, everyone. Welcome to Jamaica 411. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm your host, Michelle Stern. Before I get into it, I'm going to ask everyone, please, if you're joining me, give the video a thumbs up. Please go ahead, give the video a thumbs up from now on because me now remember to ask you later. And please share. I want this video to go to the European Commission because they are as much a cause of the problem that is going on in the Middle East. I would say that they are the genesis of the problem that is going on in the Middle East. And when you hear the history of Israel and the Jews, people who are identifying themselves these days as Jews, you are going to see what it is I'm talking about. You are going to learn today many, many, many truths and many, many truths that you did not know about Israel and about the Jews. And you are going to learn so many things that you are now going to question those religious books and what it is that they said about Israel and the Jews. The first thing I can begin by telling you as a teaser is that the people who are now calling themselves Israeli, or the country that they're calling Israel, has no association whatsoever to do with the ancient Israelites that the Bible was talking about. You heard me. There is no genetic connection whatsoever between these people using the name Israel and the original people who were called Israel. None whatsoever. Not genetic at all. So the question is, who the devil are these people? If they are not the people that were being mentioned in the Bible, who them? Well, that question is simpler to answer than you believe. The people who are calling themselves Jews today, let us establish this right off the bat. The people who are calling themselves Jews today, they are entitled to call themselves Jews. Why do I say so? Because the construct Jews, or whatever it is as it is interpreted in their language, Yiddish, or in any other European language, or in Latin, that is a construct of themselves. It has no place whatsoever in history. And I'm talking about the history of the original people called Israelites. In other words, they are Jews because they call themselves Jews, and there was nobody else in history that referred to themselves as Jews except them. So they are entitled, first and foremost, to call themselves Jews. They are not misrepresenting themselves when they do so. Are you following me so far? Yes. In other words, there is no identity theft when it comes to them calling themselves Jews. There is perhaps identity theft when they refer to themselves as Hebrews, and definitely identity theft when they attempt to associate themselves with the original Israelites. That definitely is identity theft. Good. So now that we have established that point, the question now is, who are these people? What's the truth about these people? I was at war with ChatGPT. I use them. As a matter of fact, it's the first time I'm using one of these AI tools to do the research, and that's because of the body of information that is required in this research. My understanding of how ChatGPT works is that it's an artificial intelligence, and it is programmed to scour the entire billions and billions of documents that are on the internet, on the World Wide Web, and find information for you and bring it into one place. The problem with them is that if the information that is out there is already wrong, or if it is propaganda, and that propaganda is accepted as truth when it is not, then ChatGPT is going to bring you these propaganda. It is not a human being. It is for you, therefore, when you get the information, to read carefully and assess it. If you were to go into ChatGPT now and put in any information about Flavius Josephus, you will notice that they are interpreting his book and claiming that he was writing about Jews, when in fact, the word Jew never existed. Flavius Josephus never knew anybody called Jew because they never existed. Flavius Josephus was talking about himself and some people that he described as Ludai, Ludaei. That's the name of the people that he said he was from, and they were the ones that were warring with the Romans in Jerusalem. That's what he said. However, when they interpreted his writings, they used the word Jew in the title when he never did. In Greek was the language in which he wrote in at the time. And the word that he used was Ludai. Some monk or the other at some later date decided that Ludai is translated in Latin to mean Jew. And that, of course, I will prove to you is not true. In many ways, I am going to show you that the people who were the Ludai and the people who eventually call themselves Jews are not the same people. The people who were Ludais were not even original inhabitants in Judea. They lived in Judea. Yes, but they were living among the descendants of the Israelites and the Canaanites. And just in case you are wondering, these were highly melanated people, people from the continent of what they call Africa. And there was no blood connection whatsoever between them, the Israelites, and these people who were called Ludai. Let me call it Ludai, right? Those people came from out of Mesopotamia and they migrated into the Judean areas, the Judean city, and other areas in what they call the Levant, when it was occupied at the time by the Romans. So they have no historic connections. These current Jews, they have no historic connections whatsoever with the Levant, with Palestine. None whatsoever. Their connection came when they were fleeing wars in Europe and they went into that area because it did look prospective, money can be made there. And you can, just like what would happen if we were to leave anywhere in the world and say we're going to Europe or the United States or anywhere in the world, Africa or anywhere in the world where we think there's an opportunity to, make a living, to feed ourselves and our families. That's what they did, and they went into that area. So any claims that these present-day Jews are making about Palestine being their ancestral homes and therefore an entitlement to resettle there, like any of the people who are there now, who themselves, for the most part, are migrants, that is an entitlement that they do not have. Why? Because the question we must ask, who are these people? And now I'm going to answer you. The people who are calling themselves Jews are white people. They are Europeans, if you prefer, and they all trotted out of the Caucasus Mountains together, them ancestors, and them spread out in Europe. Languages is what I use to identify them in terms of their entitlement as Europeans to live in Europe, like the Germans, like the French, like the Italians, like anybody else that is living in Europe. These Jews have a right and an entitlement to live there because that is their ancestral home. And this is what I want the European Union to understand. The Jews are your brothers. They have a right to live in Europe as you do. So why did you not carve out a part of the Europe where these people were living and give them right to live in peace and quiet? Instead, you drove them out of Europe. That's what you did. And in order to find a home, they decided that they were going to go according to what them Torah told them is them ancestral home, when them supposed to know that that is not true. And then they gone amongst the Palestinians, and before them keep them damn self quiet, they are doing nothing but making themselves a damn nuisance. You are the cause of the problem. Why did you drive the people out of their ancestral home? Take the land for yourself and then go foist them upon other people. Using them for what reason, I don't know, because I frankly don't see how Europe benefit from them being in the Middle East. How no benefit? If they were not in the Middle East, would that have affected the price of oil? The Arabs want money. So they were going to sell them oil, and with competition, the price would have been controlled. You don't need the Israelis there. What you want need them to do? Spy? Then you not have your own spy network. You know how to drop money here and drop money there and get the same Arabic people to spy on your behalf. So there was no need for them to be there in the first place. I don't see how you benefit from it. As a matter of fact, them being in that area looks to me like it's more of a problem for you than anything else. So you need to do the right thing. You need to carve up Europe, same like how you carve up Africa. The whole of the countries that they were occupying at the time, and there were several of them. You need to carve up a portion of that land and give the people, because that was their ancestral homes. 1.1 million square miles of land. And if you don't want to give them so much, give them something. They're looking now to Africa. Africa, they want to fight themselves, but I can tell them, when O be ready for fly down there, so no gun can help you, so nobody look there, so go back to the yard. It's just about, 2 million in Israel. Those are the only people who will be seeking to move. So put them in an area. The place them looking at, Africa, them says 60 to 70,000 square miles. Put them in an area of 100,000 square miles. And leave them to do their own thing. There will be no problem to you. I can guarantee you that. And how I know that? Because of them past experience, they will not be making that same mistake again. Zionists or no Zionists. Let them stay there and live how they want to live amongst them one another. There will not be a trouble to you. As a matter of fact, it would be a benefit to Europe if they were to move there, because they do have a way of making money and doing good business, and all they would benefit from that. How are you all benefiting now with them being where they are, when you are the same ones have to be spending money? Wholly for your taxpayers' money to maintain them down there. No better you bring them into Europe, give them piece of the land, just shift off your people them, or leave the people. You can leave the people. They would not be treating your people the way how them treat the Palestinians, for sure. So you have no issue at all. None. So you need to sit down amongst one another and look with the Jews and see where it is they would like to live inside of that area that was their ancestral home. What is this area? You ask. Just put in chat GPT, AI, Google, any one of them, and ask for the areas in Europe that were the ancestral homes of the Yiddish speaking people, and it will show you the map. Take out something out of that and give it to them. Let them go and do them things. You already have freedom of movement inside of Europe, so them business and them can move all around, and you're going to benefit from it, because them people know for make money. That's all they do, make money. So what's the big deal? Uno don't have any problem to carve up other countries, so why uno don't want to give up some of uno one? Think on that. This is the ancestral home of the Yiddish speaking people, as highlighted on this map of Europe. And this area is 1.1 to 1.3 million square miles. It's a lot to give to 2 million people. I agree. I agree. Now, they were living, for the most part, 8 to 9 million of them in this area, for the most part. 2 million in the diaspora. Whether it's in Spain or anywhere outside of this area, we're going to consider it diaspora. And they moved into this area somewhere between 1100 CE and 1500 CE, or what we used to call AD, this side of the calendar. Right? Now, the countries that is highlighted here: Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, Belarus, Latvia, Moldova, the western part of Russia, the eastern parts of Germany, parts of Romania, Hungary. This is what constitutes what is called Yiddish land, the ancestral homeland of the Yiddish speaking people. And who are the Yiddish speaking people? They're the Jews. However, we should not believe that only Jews speak Yiddish. You do have other persons in the area would also speak Yiddish. So we have an ancestral homeland for the Jewish people, right? Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, Belarus, Latvia, Moldova, western parts of Russia, eastern parts of Germany, parts of Romania, Hungary. That is what? 9 to 10 states. Some of you must can carve out land somewhere from all of your particular countries and give these Jewish people a homeland in the place where they develop their culture and they would have preferred to be in, had you not driven them out and treated them very badly. Not to say they don't deserve it in some instances, but you drove them out of their homeland and now they are homeless. Over in the Middle East, making a damn nuisance of themselves. You need to bring home your brothers. Bring them home. That's what you need to do. So now that we have finally established for them a homeland, where it is they're from, and where it is that they were driven out of with Hitler and bad behavior. Him a Jew too, you know. Yes, sir, was a Jew. It is now time to look at who these people are and what it is that they say about themselves. So we established that they came out of the Caucasus Mountain. They are Europeans in origin, but they are unlike a number of the Europeans. They do not settle anywhere. They are described as vagabonds, up and down the damn place. Coming like, boy, whole time people would say, Maka in them skin, them can't keep themselves quiet. So they have been up and down the place in Europe, and eventually they found themselves in what is known as the Levant or Palestine. Many of them settled in many different places. They settled in Bethlehem, they settled in Judah or Judea, they settled in Lebanon, they settled all over. And this happened, by the way, when the Romans were there, not before. So, after there was a war between the Ludai people and the Romans, they took up themselves because they were in the area where the wars were. They were in the area, in Jerusalem as well. And they were in Jerusalem at the time when the Romans and the Ludai people broke out and started to fight a battle and war, and the Ludians were defeated. The Jews then took up themselves and they went back into Europe. Not all of them, mind. Some of them, of course, would have remained behind. Now, at the time when they left, it is alleged, Mesopotamia, they did not have a cultural identity. They were not calling themselves Jews at the time. They were not calling themselves Israelites. They were not calling themselves any name. In those days, they were a family of people that moved out of a city or a town, and they would have had the name of that city or town, the people of Babylon, or people of Mesopotamia, or people of Ur, or wherever they were coming from. The Ludai people, though, they had a cultural identity because Josephus, who lived around the time when the battle took place, when the Romans and the Ludai people had it out in Jerusalem, he said that they had a name and they had some books, written books, 22 of them. And he mentioned that in his writings. What he never did was say what the books were. Now, a lot of propaganda is centered around Josephus. And part of the propaganda is that Josephus said that he was a Jew. The word Jew never existed at that time. That was an interpretation that was put upon the words that Josephus used later on by people who wanted to create a cultural identity with the people in Judea in order to make a claim that they have a right to live there. And that was a promised land that them ancestor Abraham was promised, which is the basis now of them being in the area of what I'm calling Israel, in Palestine, and making a damn nuisance of themselves. So we have established certain things that you probably didn't know. I am sure one thing that you did not know was that the people calling themselves Jews today did not have a cultural identity when they were living in Judea. Bet you didn't know that. How then did the religion Judaism develop? And a lot of what you hear again is propaganda, not true. And how I began to track the Jews in terms of who they are, as opposed to who they say they are, was when I started with their book called Tanakh. So I began to research into the Jewish people by first looking at the language to see where in Europe the language would have originated and how many of the land space was occupied. Next was to look at the cultural aspect, and for that we have to look at the religion. Now, their religion is guided, I suppose you may say, by certain religious texts. And the religious text that forms the basis of their religion is the Tanakh. The Tanakh is a canonical collection of Jewish texts, essentially what is often referred to in English as the Hebrew Bible. So when they talk about canonical, it meant that some religious leaders sat down, got together, and they were the ones that selected the texts, all of the various religious texts, and determined that these texts should be put in what we call the Hebrew Bible. Follow? So that's what that is about. They went on to say, the term Tanakh itself is an acronym derived from the initial letters of its three main sections. So Tanakh is not a word by itself. They simply took the three main sections, parts of the names, and then put it together, and they call it the Tanakh. So what are these three main sections of the Tanakh? The first one is the Torah. It is the teaching or the law. And what you're talking about now is the 5 books of Moses. What are those 5 books? The 5 books of Moses are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Yes. So the Torah comprises the 5 books of Moses. I need you to make a note of that, please. Very important. The second main section is called the Nevi'im. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. My Jewish friends, I hope so. And Nevi'im refers to the prophets. They are divided into the former prophets, or the first set of prophets, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. I do believe they refer to them as the main. And then you have the latter prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets. And that gives you a total of 19 prophets. Make a note, please. Now, they said that this covers the history of Israel in the land, prophetic messages, warnings, and calls to righteousness. And we do know that if this was referring to the history of Israel in the land, it is not these people, European people today calling themselves Jews, that this is referring to. And I shall prove it to you shortly. And the third main section of the Tanakh is the Ketuvim, and that means writings. And it says a more diverse collection, including poetry, wisdom, and historical writings. And the Ketuvim includes books such as Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, Chronicles, and they said there were others. And they just mentioned 11 and said there were others, often more literary or reflective than the Torah and the Nevi'im. So the Torah is about the law and the teachings of the law. The Nevi'im are about the prophets and what it was that they prophesied in the name of the Lord. And then you have the Ketuvim, which were the writings, the wisdom, words of wisdom, Proverbs, Psalms, and so on and so forth. So this is the Jewish main text. It is comprised of three main sections. And we're going to now look at the first one in more detail, the Torah. And to begin the understanding of the Torah, the law, we must now look at a group of people that was called the men of the Great Assembly. And so I asked the questions. Who were the men of the Great Assembly? What were their full names? When did the meetings take place? How many meetings took place? Who convened the meeting? What did they meet to decide? And what were the decisions that they made? Now you ask the question, so who are these people? It is this assembly that they said that finalized the texts of the Hebrew Bible. Let me read what it says here. The men of the Great Assembly are described in later Jewish tradition as a group of sages who led the Jewish community in the early Second Temple period. However, most of what is known about them comes from latter rabbinic literature, not contemporary historical records. Because of this, many details such as exact meetings, full membership, and decisions are uncertain. We come back to that. Now I need you to make notes. What was the Great Assembly? The Great Assembly is described in Jewish tradition as a council of 120 sages who helped organize religious life after the return from Babylonian exile in the 5th century BCE. 5th century BCE is in the year 500 BCE. You heard when they said that this meeting took place? Yes, make notes. Their activities are mainly recorded in latter texts, such as the Mishnah and Talmud. Approximate period traditionally given between 500 to 300 BCE. Right? Now, I should have told you, or maybe I did, that a large part of the problem with both the Europeans and those Europeans calling themselves Jews, they had this unfortunate bad habit of lying about when events took place. They had the habit of backdating. Did something take place now? But because they want to give themselves an historic perspective, they give a date of a time in the past when it never happened. Sometimes the events themselves never occurred. They made it up. So we are going to find out now whether this great assembly happened or didn't. And of course, you would have noticed that they can't tell you when it took place. They can't tell you how many. Well, they tell us 120 people. They can't tell us how many meetings these men had. They can't tell us where they met, and they can't tell us when they met, which is most important. But if you think that that is extraordinary, let me continue. When I asked the question, who convened the assembly? They said tradition usually associates its founding with Ezra, sometimes alongside Nehemiah. These leaders returned from Babylon after the Persian king Cyrus the Great allowed exiled Judeans to return to rebuild the temple. You hear the elaborate story that they gave? Now, let us now look at who some of these persons who were in attendance, they said, at this meeting of the assembly to organize the religious lives of the, according to them, Judeans. Now, we need to pay close attention to the language that ChatGPT uses, because they have a way of intimating that what they're relaying to you, because they have a way of intimating that what they are relaying to you is fact. They mention the assembly. Now they're speaking about known members, the names. Tradition says there were 120 members, but only a few names are preserved. These include prophets and later sages, and they begin with Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Daniel, mentioned in some traditions, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And you will notice, my Christian friends, that some of these persons bear the same name as some of the prophets in the Old Testament. Do you agree? Yes. So, what is it that the Jewish people are intimating? Are they saying that these sages were the ones who wrote the books? For example, did Daniel write his book? Did Malachi? Did Zechariah? Did Nehemiah? Did Ezra? Did any of these sages, did they write the books that contain in your Old Testament? That's the question you want to know, right? That is a question that you would like answers to. Is that correct? Well, let us find out. Now, whenever you're told something by anybody or anything, the most important thing for you to do, in addition to hearing, is to ask the question, what is the source of this information? You want the source of the information outside of the religious books in which they were contained. In other words, if these people existed and they did all these wonderful things, are there other books written that mention them? Are they historical people, real people that existed like how me and you exist today? And this is what you want to know, because you need to make sure that is not make up story people give you and you go plant that in your head and think it's true. When I ask how many meetings took place, since it took place over a long period between 500 to 300, that's 200-year period, so how many took place? Is it that they started in the year 500 and it took them a while? Here is what they said. There is no historical record stating how many meetings occurred, where they took place, how often they convened. Later texts simply describe them as a collective authority, not a series of documented assemblies. So, at the time when these so-called people who were sages, you would think that if they were meeting, that they would at least have a scribe present to write down what it is that they have decided in order to instruct their descendants as to how they should conduct themselves in a religious way, because that was the purpose of the assembly. So they are telling us that they could find no record, neither in the religious text or outside of the religious text. Well, they are telling us that they could find no historical record, and even the religious text could not provide the information about where they met and when they met, only referring to them as a collective authority. So you explain to me now how it is that these learned people, Ezra, Nehemiah, Jeremiah, and those folks met, and none of them could write. And if them could not read and write, them could only talk, then you mean to tell me they never come with a scribe to write down what they said so that they can instruct their people? No. As a matter of fact, the only source of information for this alleged meeting was in a book that was written long after. Let us now turn to that book, and you're going to learn something very startling about the Jewish religion. So let me remind you now, it says that the Great Assembly that is being described in Jewish tradition as being the group that organized religious life, their activities are mainly recorded in latter texts such as the Mishnah and the Talmud. We're going to now look at the Mishnah and see what the Mishnah said about this assembly, if anything. Having been introduced to these two books, the Mishnah and Talmud, the question is, when was the Mishnah? The question is, when was the Mishnah and Talmud written and by whom? And it says here that the Mishnah and Talmud were written centuries after the events. And what event was that? The meeting of the men of the great assemblies. And they said they had more than one authors. And they were, of course, rabbis. The first thing I want you to make note was when the Mishnah was written and who wrote it. It says it was written around 200 CE. This is this side of the calendar, what we called AD before. Who wrote it? It was a rabbi called Judah ha-Nasi. Make a note of those two things. Judah Nahasi wrote the Mishnah, him alone by himself, in the year 200 CE. How did he create the Mishnah? They said he gathered and edited earlier oral teachings of rabbis known as the Tanaim, teachers from roughly 70 to 200 CE, right? So just before he wrote the Mishnah, and the year 70, which was after they said that the temple was destroyed. And what exactly is the Mishnah? Critical for you to know. The Mishnah is the first written collection of the oral Torah, which Jewish tradition says had previously been transmitted orally. Trying to figure out what the deuce was going on here, I decided to do further research. And their explanation for the oral Torah was that you had aspects of the Torah that was not written. Like the explanation of it, I suppose they meant it was not written down, like the laws of Moses and so on. That's my understanding of what it is they were trying to say. Now, I need you to follow me now. Follow me closely. Because something strange is going on with the history that is being presented to us by our Jewish friends in order to establish their lineage. So we're going now back to Rabbi Judah Nahashi. Now, I had said earlier that he was the one who alone compiled the oral teaching aspect of the Torah. Evidently, there were others, but he was the main man. He was like the general, so they call his name alone. That is what I read elsewhere. Now, when he spoke about, and he was the only one, evidently, in the Mishnah that spoke about the men of the great assembly, he was establishing to himself, to his fellow Jews, as a rabbi, that these men of this great assembly were their ancestors. And that is the first thing that we need to establish in this argument. These 120 prophets and sages, he would have been saying, are the ancestors of his people, the Jews, the European people that are identifying themselves as Jews. In other words, if he can establish that these people who put the Tanakh together, who put the Hebrew Bible together, canonized it, he would have established that they were the chosen people, and it was to them that God had made the promise. And that is a big deal. That now gives you real power. You can go around the world and do any damn thing you want. And that was what they were trying to establish. But what is it that the historical evidence prove? Outside of the Mishnah that was written by the rabbi, there is no Persian record of this great assembly. No Greek historians wrote about it, and no archaeological evidence was ever turned up to prove that any such assembly ever existed in history. You follow? So there is no historical evidence outside of what the rabbi said that mentioned this great assembly that did all these wonderful things that he claimed that they did. Jewish tradition, but it's a Jewish tradition that is not rooted in facts. What is extraordinary about what we have discovered today is that the rabbi, by pointing his ancestors to these men of the great assembly, which never existed, what he would have done is to create a lineage to those people. And this is according to the Jewish tradition. He didn't just make it up on his own like that, right? He wrote about something that was Jewish tradition, except it is not true. So that is the lineage that he established. Ezra, Haggai, and these people were their ancestors. Now, Flavius Josephus mentioned another group of people that he descended from, the Ludai. And he said that they came out of the Mesopotamia and they went and settled in Judea, the same place that the Jews are claiming that they had settled in as well. But the matter now of who is speaking the truth is a matter of who is claiming lineage to where. The Jews, the European Jews, are also claiming that they had gone into Judea via Mesopotamia. And they are claiming that Josephus was talking about them. And that Josephus claimed that he was Jewish and it was them he was talking about. And to validate the claim that they're making, what they did was to take Josephus's writings and then interpret the name Ludai to say that that is the same thing as Jew, right? They're saying that that is a Greek name for them, Jew. The question I would like to ask them is, if you were the Ludai people, why did you change your name to Jew? So this was how they had insinuated themselves into biblical history. And the whole purpose of it, of course, is to attempt to steal other people's birthright, the real Israelites. So we're now going to establish and show that the persons that Josephus was talking about, the Ludai people, are not Jews. They were people from Mesopotamia, yes, but they were not the Jews. The Jews are attempting to steal their identity. They are not Jews. And Ludai is the name of the people. That's what they are called. And it's not to be interpreted to mean Jews because they are not the Jews. And why they are not the Jews? Because they don't come from the same lineage. Josephus said that they came from Mesopotamia. The Jews said through this rabbi that they descended from those persons who they claim were the men of the great assembly. The persons such as Ezra, Nehemiah, Jeremiah, all of those prophets, Haggai, and sages. That's who them said them descended from. But here is the bombshell. Josephus wrote about 5 or 6 books. And in none of those books did he ever mention anybody or any group called the men of the great assembly. You heard me. The Jews are claiming that these men are the ones that put the Hebrew Bible together and established how they should live their lives as good Jews. That's what they said. And Josephus in his writings never mentioned them. When he was talking about his people and their ancestry, he never mentioned that their religious books were put together by any group of people called the men of the Great Assembly. Now, isn't that extraordinary? That is evidence number 2, that the Ludai people and the people who calling themselves Jews today, the Europeans, they are not the same people. But if you think that that is all, it even gets more interesting, because in Judea at the time were living the Israelites as well as the Canaanites, with the people coming through from the Mesopotamia, escaping wars that was going on over there at the time. And so they were all living in this area called Judea. They were being called Judeans by the Romans, irrespective of what their ethnic group was. So now you have Josephus in his writings claiming that his people, the Ludai, they were the ones who had written the sacred writings of 22 books. You have now the Jews who are trying to claim that they are the Ludai. And then there is a small matter of the Israelites who actually lived in Judea at the time. Is it possible that what is going on here is that the Ludai people, having left Mesopotamia and settled in Judea as a small minority people, they were a small minority people, and then you had the majority Judean people, the Israelites, as well as the Canaanites. And is it therefore possible that what is going on here is that the Ludai had converted to the Abrahamic religion, the religious teachings of the Israelites? That's the point that I'm making. And they together would be claiming now Abraham as their own ancestor. Just as I suppose some Christian people in Jamaica will be claiming that Abraham is their ancestor too. That's my point. And just in case some of us start to get some very, very funny ideas in our heads, no, the Europeans could not have been the Israelites. Impossible, in fact, for them to have been the Israelites. And let me show you why. This is the reason why. Were the original Israelite populations of Judea melanated people? Yes. The original Israelite descended populations of Judea were melanated people, meaning they had high levels of melanin in their skin, consistent with the populations of ancient Levant and the broader Near East antiquity. This is the reason why those people calling themselves Jews could never have been the Israelites in the first place. Why? Because them are white people, and the ancient Israelites were melanated people, black people. And those persons who usually say so, you have these young people, and they talk about the Israelites and they were the true Israelites and so on. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Favor like say it's true. So, there you have it, the evidence. The people who are calling themselves Jews are fully entitled to call themselves such because they are the only set of people that went by that name. They make up the name for themselves, good for them. But when it comes now to the matter of the Israelites and whether or not they have any ancestral claims to any land over in the what we call the Middle East, no, they do not. And therefore they should not be there. And that is why all of these crosses following them. They need to go back home, and you people at the European Commission only need to make arrangements to have your brothers and your sisters come back home. Just as I suggested when the video started, small up on yourself and make room for them and let them come home. Well, folks, that's it for me today. Please let me know what you think in the comments section, whether you agree with my analysis and my evidence or you disagree. Tell me why you disagree if you do. If you have your own evidence of your own, please let me know. And whatever you do, though, let me know what you think because I am very much interested. Yes, indeed. So let me once again thank you for joining me today for sharing, subscribing, liking the video, and leaving your comments in the comments section. Until next time, take very good care of yourselves and walk good.